Okay, Crusader skin, Orc skin, Pallid bone. That's not enough colors. What the? Who broke into my apartment?
Seriously, Ghost, sponsor a nerd. When do you use this as opposed to this? Let's talk about that. Welcome to Tattoo Tabletop. My name is James, and today we are comparing the classic titans against each other. Speedpaint versus Contrast. So, Citadel versus Army Painter.
Here at Tattoo Tabletop, we have a lot of fun, so be sure to like, share, subscribe down below. It's completely free and it helps me out. Now back to the video.
Now, as you can see behind me, I have a lot of these. And fortunately for me, the Army Painter was more than kind enough to actually send me the Mega Speed Paint set, which is a massive, massive thank you to them. I'm very, very excited. I started diving and dipping my feet into speed paints a little while ago, picking up a few colors here and there. It's really nice to have a nice rounded range, and believe me, I have already started diving into them. That being set aside, I need to compare these fairly. I need to look at both with a scrutinous lens and figure out which one is the better tool for the job. Well, I might as well just give you the answer. Both. Yes, both. I know what you're thinking. Both. No, this is a versus. One must be the winner, right? One must be definitively better. And I'd argue, no, it does not have to be. I would say that you can honestly use both. Once again, when we come back to the discussion of my perspective of the hobby, we're talking about tools in the tool chest. Tools in the tool chest is everything is a tool that can be used for a certain thing, and that's always important because tools in the tool chest means that you're always going to have options. Now, if you lock yourself into one specific paint brand because it's your favorite, that's not a bad thing. That means you have a very reliable product that you like to use. In my case, I like to use a little bit of everything. Now, I do have my favorites. I do admit that the Army Painter Fanatic line is one of my favorites, and it's one of the few paints that I fully and completely backed right off the get-go, where I got to try them out and I dove head first. Now, when it came to speed paints, I remember hearing about the issues with Speedpaint 1.0, which was the reactivation issue. Most people defend that, some people defend that this is not an issue, that this was in fact a feature of the speed paints. But I did understand where people were coming from with Speedpaint 1.0, primarily because in my case, if you're using speed paints or if you're using contrast, you're trying to get through a project somewhat quickly, or you're trying to utilize something for speed, right? That's the point. That's why it's got speed in the word, speed paint. When we're looking at something like that, I understood why people were upset. Now, Speedpaint 2.0 has seemed to resolve a good amount of those issues. It still exists, but I will say, having more experience with it, it is not a negative. It is, in fact, a positive. And the main reason because when you're going along with your contrast paint, sometimes, as we all know, you're working really quickly. Contrast gets somewhere that you don't want it to. You have your speed paint or your contrast that gets somewhere you don't need it, and you need to get rid of it quickly. If you quick rinse off your brush in your water and then just lightly wick at it a little bit, sometimes it comes off, sometimes it doesn't. Citadel Contrast has a tendency to stain a little quicker. And because it can stain a little bit quicker, it's harder to remove if you don't catch it. As opposed to speed paint, even if it's there for just a little bit longer while you're quick finishing up that panel, that plate, or something like that, you're much more likely to rinse your brush real quick and quick take care of that. So the real question is, what do you use these for? Now, in the case of contrast, I like to use these for a little bit more of a quicker permanent effect. Now, that being said, this usually isn't going on long, flat panels. Yes, you can use speed paint mediums, you can use other things like that, or contrast medium to help increase the fluidity of it, make it a little bit easier on yourself. But there are still some colors that are a little tricky. But I will say, in terms of the contrast range specifically, there are some colors out there that are uniquely formulated and to my knowledge, still haven't quite been replicated. Good example is like Storm Fiend. Storm Fiend is one of my favorite colors. Now, that being said, Storm Fiend from the contrast range is kind of a pain in the butt to work with. If I'm being completely honest, I did an entire Leagues of Votann army with them. I love the way they look. I love the color, but it was a pain to get it nice and smooth. So Speedpaint, if you can figure that out for me, that'd be real swell. When it comes to using Speedpaint, what do I like about this? This has the more Speedpaint effect, if that makes sense. In terms of its fluidity is a little bit smoother, which means that it is moving across the actual model itself and settling into the recesses a lot quicker or a lot easier. As you can see on the screen, as I've been talking this entire time, I'm using my Cruel Boys as a good example because I use some contrast and I use some speed paint. And the things that I'm using the speed paint for are the things that I want a clearer definition on, or something that has a higher area and then a recessed area. So for example, the Cruel Boys skin. I really love Ghillie Dhu for the skin. It's a nice vibrant green, but also settles really nicely into the recesses, gives it that definition, and just overall does the job that you want from it. Why wouldn't you? It's fantastic. So Ghillie Dhu is absolutely 11 out of 10 in my book. It absolutely covered it. But I also used Flesh Terrors for the shields. And that being said, because Flesh Terrors, number one, is just one of my favorite colors. I absolutely love the color itself. But it's something that didn't have a ton of flat areas. It actually has a lot of texture and things going on with it. So I don't need to worry as much about the adding the mediums to make it flow better. Not to mention Flesh Terrors is one of the better ones, but that's one thing. That's its own other thing, which I'll talk about in a little bit of a second here. That's why I'm able to just cover it all and just kind of knock it out in one go. It looks nice and it does what it's supposed to. Now, like I just kind of said, comparing pros, cons.
When you're taking a break from your latest quest, the Bellows Bistro has exactly what you need. Located next to the Forge in Chaska with a fantastic fantasy setting, a wide selection of unique food items that will be sure to satisfy the adventurer in you. While you open up that new pack of Magic the Gathering cards, maybe play some board games or just take in the aesthetic. This will for sure become a staple for you in the future. Thank you to the Bellows Bistro for sponsoring this video.
Pros of Speed Paint. Actually acts like what Speed Paint is supposed to. You know, run across the surface, stain the surface, and settle into the recesses. It does that in spades. The only time this is a con is when you are sometimes having a certain model where when you're putting it onto the model, it really pools into a loose area. And sometimes if it pools too much, it'll just run straight into the next thing, which, to be fair, leads into pro number 2, which is it's easy to wick off really quickly. If you catch it soon enough, you can wick it off really quickly. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. It is something you do have to be conscious of, because if you're doing multiple speed paints, if they sort of run into each other at some point, you know, if you have your models here and you put one here, you put it here, and they still haven't dried, if they meet here, there's a chance that they'll just quick pull together and then run off in their own separate color, and it can cause some problems. But overall, behaves the most like what you would expect them to. Contrast. Pros. Well, it was one of the first ones, and, you know, they work really well. And to be fair, both work fantastically in the airbrush, so that's a big win for both. Both actually, you know, behave themselves appropriately, which is very good. But number 2 being, for contrast being kind of a con, like I said, we've seen it all before. We've seen the staining on large flat areas. If you're using this on Space Marines and you're doing it by brush, you need the mediums. You need to lean into that slap chop, but you need the mediums in order to make it behave the way you probably want it to. Or going option B there, you just use it through the airbrush, and that'll help with your zenithal and your dry brush and everything like that. It'll be a little bit easier, and then you just use acrylic to paint over it. So I've rambled on for about 9 minutes here, but the real question is, which one is better? And like I said at the beginning, tools in the tool chest. These are paints of any kind, whether they be the speed paint variety, contrast variety, acrylic variety, any of it are an expression of skill. Yes, people who use these are people who are maybe just trying to get their army painted and just get it done and make it look somewhat decent. That's a possibility. There's also a ton of professional painters and top tier miniature painters who use these speed paints, use these contrasts, and they use them for their major projects, their Golden Demon submissions, everything like that. And they both work. Yes, one was designed for the idea of helping people get their miniatures to the tabletop quicker, but they both accomplish two purposes, which is fantastic. So if we're talking about which one is better, in my opinion, if we're talking about the staining and flowing into the recesses portion of it, I would argue Speedpaint. Army Painter Speedpaint is a little bit better for that. It flows a little bit easier, and it does have a lot of really good coverage to it. Now, if we're talking colors, there's still a couple colors in the contrast range that I still really like, i.e. Storm Fiend. There's a couple nearby it, but not quite it. And of course, you also, from the contrast range, also have things like Imperial Fist and Ball Red, two pure pigmented contrasts that do absolute wonders through an airbrush or even through a brush. I've used them quite frequently recently to do my yellows, and the coverage is immaculate, and also the fact that it stains the black area means when you're doing a zenithal, you're still getting yellow to yellow. It's just doing the yellow to darker yellow as opposed to yellow black, because the pigment doesn't actually penetrate the black when you're using standard contrast. So tools on the tool chest, I got to give them both props. I love them both to death. I will probably still continue to use them, although I am using a lot more speed paint these days. Again, massive thank you to the Army Painter for sending me this set. It is so awesome to see them support the community in the ways that they do. I absolutely adore Army Painter, so thank you again for that. But let me know down in the comments down below, what do you think? Do you use more speed paint? Do you use more contrast? Are you watching this because you're sitting somewhere in between the two and you're trying to figure out which one to use? Let me know down below, and of course, feel free to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, share to your family chat, throw it in the New York Times, crossword chat that you guys are all starting. I know I have mine with my own family. But until next time, do me a favor and just go paint something.